11:18-2011. Birth through death. Human appearance and archetypal conception. A timeless representation of heroic mortality and megalithic structural manifestation. Acquisition and development of steel and holy in the essential subjects bathed and washed hands. A trial of endurance, an experience of stamina. God, ever so happy in malicious emptiness, the playful little actions of the internal devil, sowing the virtuous seed in the soil of Atlas, the harvest of absolute undeniable certainty, discourse of existential wisdom, return of the staff, time flows, Siegfried's funeral death, further in the distant horizon march unknown warriors, surrendered substance by unholy despotism, providence of fantastic virility, mute perseverance, labor toward death, birth and conception of the holy gospels, heroic nature intervenes, subordination and evaporation of wicked states, just before eternity, the will of the nearly insane, propagation of a contented monstrosity, a descriptive reference to the continuous overlord. A spell of rationality encircles the realm of the subject's holy shrine. Testimonial remembrance of heroic tragedy. Resurrection of the divine spirit. Principle of infinite regeneration. The star of the planetary system found bestowed inside every objective phenomena. A spiritual universe. A breathable world. Struggling apart from the blackest depths of cosmic obliterative space. Arrival of theoretical anatomy and pinnacle origins of magical sanctuary. Lost activities in the relic's shroud. Lightning strikes the eye within the existential storm. Pain, dread, and darkness unfold before prolonged successions of time. Glimmering lights in a distant mirage. Sensational inspiration exposed as false, empty, and a lie. Preservation of the holy substance before the annihilation of the will. Renewed potential life within the womb of maternal gestation in order to try it once more within a positive, redemptive afterlife. Might of representation. The summarization of infinite principles endowed in the subject with knowledge of truth and universal correction. Wicked pride develops coincidentally, without desire, without consciousness. Careful carriage of bodily form among strange societal congregation, in order to deny acceleration of sinful, condemning human pace. The knowledge of insanity, recognition and result of possible ugliness. Further interest and desire to carry the form and affirm the concept and art of human representation, within and throughout, eternally and everlastingly. Death of the multitude, resurrection of the spiritual essence, off inside uncharted heavens. Revolution of the endless cycle, revolution of the divine consecration. Birth through death, birth through death. November 18, 2011. 11/22/2011. Letters 3. Assembled some writing together from the past few days. Correspondence between a few excellent friends, though edited to appear singular. Letters of interest too. November 16, 2011. I'm indeed a Taurus. With me, I'm very much so. I'm heavy and grave. I love the culinary arts. I'm always loving to tutor and educate people, as the Hierophant would, through celestial, mystical, or spiritual intervention. I'm not a vegetarian right now. I was so during a phase of my life, a long time ago. Nowadays, I will eat anything, and I'm willing to try all sorts of new food, so long as I can, that I'm not allergic to it. I have trouble with this, as I have had a lifelong allergy to peanuts ingredients. The mere scent of peanut butter drives me to a nauseous state. It is unfortunate, but there is not much that I can do about this. November 17, 2011. I tend to practice this desire of reading multiple hordes of books at once. I do this continuously and seem to make sure to read from at least 4 or 5 separate books a day. While I'm in the process of currently attempting to finish nearly all of the books in the collection of my library, some several dozens of books, which this, of course, will take its time, albeit very prolonged. I think it is okay to indulge rather excessively into many books at once, so long as the sharpness of the mind and the method of the practice do not wear extensively, and the reader retains still a sense of level-headedness and acute understanding. I wish that I owned some sculpture like Zeus or Athena someday. The symbolism of the Greek statues and marble structures give off an air of refinement and reverence, something I'm always indebted to relate. Baroque is so very stimulating and fine in its nature. I enjoy the organ works of Bach very much, in fact, as well, of course, Handel's music in general. I tend to favor him over Bach, whose influence, in particular Bach's, seems more popularly favored than Handel's for various peculiar reasons. It is questioned whether that I believe in spirits, and I answer that yes, indeed, I do, very much so. In fact, I'm much more superstitious than the average person that I come into contact with in my daily life. At night, especially during a certain period of my life when I was living in another cabin of mine, one that was markedly more primitive and cut off from civilization and other people, the atmospheric presence and resonance of spirits culminating in that place, be it from howling from the outside or footsteps coming from the roof, inevitably led me to confirm the fact that spiritual activity is very much true and indeed a reality. They're good and bad spirits accordingly, though the former do not seem to appear so frequently as the latter. For I think, in order for good spirits to come alive or make their presence felt, that much general activity or life in the room or wherever else must be determined and conditioned, so that when the good spirits do show up, the concentration or attention upon basic ontological concerns in a human is simply not as much recognized. Therefore, they go about usually without notice. However, with bad spirits, they likely come about during moments of sharp silence, solitude, and isolation in the dead of night, likely when little activity is divergent of the human to some other matter. Therefore, the bad spirit becomes more easily perceived. In any event, I seem to perceive that when a subject has fallen asleep and is dreaming, that spiritual forces and activity can befall onto him and direct the form and representation of his dreams, sometimes giving rise to pleasant dreams, other times nightmares. This latter condition comes about most frequently, so it seems, when a subject is resting in bed without the sheets covering him, especially when the temperature in the room is cold and is inducing the person to unknowable shivers. I reflect upon these ideas taking form in action in regard to my own person as well. Spirits truly exist. They seem to be a kind of symbolic, indirect, or sometimes direct knowledge of God, that he refers to his subjects, the occurrence of certain strange phenomena, in order to generate at least some means or method of communication to him, as he wills it as such from time to time. The further the condition and nature one becomes acquainted with, the likelier one will find the world swarming and whirling with cosmic energy, or of life-denying spirits, as do nearly all primitives and all higher intelligent animals, almost without exception. As for discussion of the universe, I believe that matter that is all objective phenomena that rely on the will of the Lord, the substance found in every sensation and impression, one that extends far out to the edge of the universe, and contracts deep into the nature of the human brain, is eternal. That this matter represents in fact the will of God, therefore is God, and since the reality of the universe is God, there is likely no dual morality found embedded in the laws of nature, but of one absolute morality that represents justice, cause and effect, regeneration and annihilation, cyclical continuity, and such, that these concepts and ideas constitute the character and nature of God, and he is certainly not of the pseudo-character imposed by these charlatan Christians of the modern age that endow human features into the Lord, and try in vain to represent to others him as something nice, kind, gentle, or loving, when the truth of the matter is very far from the case, and if ever a subject in the known universe were to be conceived, that person would already have been helplessly determined by his fate by good or bad karma, for past lives, however many, must subsequently endure what it is of his nature to expect and to experience in his revelation. The Christian is noted for failing to observe the various brutal, cold, and rational ways of the nature of the universe, that their God seemingly forever fails to answer their prayers. They wonder why, when they should rather know, or at least acquaint themselves with some depth or degree of knowledge that God is good to those conceived of a good disposition, and bad to those conceived of a bad disposition, that there is very little that can be done to change or alter the course of a man's lifetime in existence. The good will find salvation not through everlasting life, which is hypocrisy and impossible, regardless if this were to take place within the universe or without it. If, in regard to the latter, such a thing were at all even possible, which it likely is, simply put, but through everlasting nothingness and cosmic annihilation of the will, those disposed to bad and unfortunate fate continue their existence in various forms on the earth, or somewhere within the universe, be it man, woman, animal, fish, demonic spirit, or divine deity, until, for once and at last, this bad disposition were to transform and generate its first traces of resemblance of goodness, and thereafter succeed into the everlasting hall of divine salvation through eventual annihilation of the will. However, it seems, after looking deeper into the subject matter, that even everlasting nothingness seems an impossibility. For how long could such a state of nothingness retain itself, without recognizing once again the necessity of completing its void thesis with a monastic absolute antithesis, and thereupon succeed and follow a course and chain of events, life and such all over again, only to see its will return once more back again to that state and condition of absolute annihilation, after the subject sees to its final salvation. Therefore, giving these remarks, I would need to conclude that not only is matter eternal, that the Lord represents the universe, and thus matter, but that even annihilation of the will into a state of nothingness presupposes a thesis, that of nothingness and the void, which thereafter necessitates an antithesis of absolute will and creation, which with this regenerated driving force subsequently bangs the universe open again from its atomic shell, and thus all time, space, and causality take their succession, position, and sentence once again and generate a renewed harmony, with mistakes and errors in the will that generate evil, and thus slow down the process of the universe's necessary annihilation, but only to concede once again, of course, as it does so eternally, now that I make these concluding remarks. Anyway, I would love to see the northern lights one day, as I live farther down south from the general appearance. I have not journeyed farther north than Pennsylvania in my lifetime. I have not seen them just yet, but they do seem to possess this wonderful ability to captivate the imagination upon a person's perception of them. I wonder at times if there is something irregular or abnormal about the sun's behavior. It seems the earth has become brighter over the years. It can be merely by eyesight or its relative unhealthiness over time, though it seems perhaps that the earth's atmosphere is weakening and letting in further ultraviolet rays to an extent that hasn't been experienced before, likely brought upon by the inventions and culminations of man's nature and constructive existence. I do feel disheartened as well when I hear about such things. China drilling for silver on the moon, taking the viral diseases of man onto other planets, exhausting the natural resources of the earth for humans' gain. I don't know whether the earth in its natural order will tolerate the phenomenon of man much longer. As is natural with the will of the Lord, there will likely be mass extinctions of men this time, some day to come, as occurred coincidentally to the dinosaurs, the trilobites, and such throughout much earlier times during the Earth's history. As in the West, with the generous and excessive amounts of technological gadgetry and material things to occupy and distract the mind with much conceited pleasure, it is understandable that most subjects in the West possess a great aptitude and proneness to psychological conditions, depression, fear, and such, whereas in societies focusing on natural desires toward the transcendental and the heavens, the mind, intellect, it is understandable that here the persons of these societies generate much farther degrees of human happiness and such, as here there is always much more to look for and to find. The rich man with all his earthly possessions arrayed before him finds boredom and thus despair, whereas the poor man with little materials possesses an acquired tendency to enjoy things in life when they do occur to him, as such rewards and satisfactions on this earth are for him so very minimal, he spends time contemplating his potential. November 17, 2011. It seems that this idea of the cold is something I desire very gratefully for. I feel it, crave it intensely. I'm so satisfied now, very much so, for being situated in a town that is 4,700 feet elevation, with regular cool air and a lovely terrain of pines and coniferous flora. Prior to this time, the place I was living in pretty much an urban desert wasteland at sub 500 feet elevation. I believe the climate biome was in fact a semi-Mediterranean desert terrain, that is the kind of humidity and heat that would be found somewhere much nearer to the equator or in some arid kind of landscape. It never snowed there. It never does either, I don't think. It rained infrequently, and during the summer the temperature would rise to above 100 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the whole day and night. I couldn't sleep with any blankets on me. I needed the fan on high all throughout the night, and the window open as well, just to catch a glimpse of a relatively residual amount of cool temperature, which wasn't much. It was hell there. Almost literally. Even very cold temperatures do not affect me that much. It can be 30 to 40 degrees, and I will be out walking around with a t-shirt on and not feel too badly the effects of the cold. I love it so very much. I look forward to the snow as much as the same. It should snow here sometime this month once again, more heavily this time. I love it when the nights are bitter cold here. It makes me feel like I'm in the right place, somewhere very north, far removed from the equatorial belt, in vast and expansively majestic lands, full of pines and hills, conifers, grasses and lakes, with the accompanying fresh cold air that I long for with much desire and craving. California varies dramatically in its areas of influence, of affluence. There's Los Angeles, for one thing, which of course represents currently one of the most apocalyptic places on Earth. Therefore, there are neighborhoods in there where the white man basically cannot even show himself out in public, lest he be physically threatened and mugged, violently assaulted, or murdered. Gangs everywhere run loose, just like in the wild. It is a pitiful scenario. There are very rich areas, such as in Hollywood or Beverly Hills and various parts and places throughout the state, with multi-million-dollar mansions and estates gracing various neighborhoods. Some were rather close in my vicinity when I was once living near San Diego. The overall economic state condition of the neighborhood that I live here is in rather middle class. The cabins are pretty good sized. The people here will say hello to you or simply wave their hand at you, even if you're driving by them in your car and they are walking on the side of the street. There are many metropolitan and well-developed areas in California. It can be rather difficult at times, especially in Southern California, to find even a simple resting spot that one can devote himself to nature and experience a sense of peace while out in the outdoors. Up in the north of the state, things are better, much more natural, mountainous forested too. I've experienced trouble finding more people with an intellectual side verging on master morality. There's so few of them. Nearly everyone, so it seems, has succumbed to the ethics and morality of Christianity and its consequential effects of nihilism and creative indifference. Nothing can be posited outside of their code of ethics without generally becoming negated, dismissed, picked at, and rejected. The Christian is so very notable in his way of destroying or trying to silence genuine fresh air and new creative evolution. It is pathetic. There are demons grabbing at the soul in order to succumb or to convert us to their pseudo-religion of inferiors, wastrels, and parasites. A community of mediocrity attempting to vainly glorify themselves or affirm their base elements, sentiments as intelligence, noble, or of any sort of value and worth, which they do not possess. If the last remaining men of true intellectual merit do not submit themselves to prolific practice and utilization of the pen or of the rhetorical word to somehow help better improve the morality and diagnose and remove the cancerous tumor growth that represents Christianity and its various morality, then nearly all the state of the West will have fallen victim and prey to the exposed feral clutches of this pitiful morality, for master morality in itself will have no room to breathe, no limits from, especially and unfortunately for those blessed and gifted entities that are born with the disposition of master morality as such. Beyond helping it, it appears eternally in the nature of humanity. It cannot be totally erased. If it seems erased totally, then it is merely in a convoluted, distorted, manipulated state, well enough in a master's brainwashed mind that he cannot any longer think for himself or find any valuable resources, so that he effectively commits defeat, with or without himself knowing it or being aware of it as such. We cannot sit behind the ranks of war. Life is war, and everyone hates someone, whether the liberals pretend to love everyone regardless. Present a truly gifted, quick-spirited, intelligent, noble, and virtuous man before them, and instantaneously comprehend the hostility and resentment these vermin of the left will to demonstrate to this genuine person. We hate the left or inferiors directly. It is tricky with them, for they are consistently dragging the masters down into their simpleton view and perspective of thought, as they will tell you, very wrongly, that all men are equal, be he virtue incarnate or eternal thief and trickster. The task is to separate their delusional universal packaging and expose their values for what they are: dirty, rotten, imbecilic, and corrosive to the status, structure, hierarchy, and health of a true, livable, breathable society. November 18, 2011. As for Shakespeare, I have always retained an interest in his works, especially his plays, that of which Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet I have been meaning to get a hold of a copy from the local bookstore. If not, then I wish to purchase a full collection of his plays, which I found at the bookstore a few weeks ago. I recently read through the entirety of Julius Caesar and enjoyed it very much. I understand that much of Shakespeare's sentence structures and syntax may appear as difficult to most modern readers. However, for me, I usually have little difficulty in understanding him for some reason. I think it may have to do with being well versed and acquainted with the notions of philosophy and general abstract language, which Shakespeare tends to make use of very much in his works. My friend Tor and I, Odin, would schedule trips to various places in nature and a hike all around the trails, camp on occasion in desolate wilderness, bring our swords with us and practice fighting, learn how to survive in the wilderness based only off of natural resources. We were very pagan-oriented during this time. He still is, I think. It held many values and morals that were standing in direct contrast to the majority and multitude of Western persons, simply for we were establishing our efforts to detach ourselves from the modern world, to create our own value systems based on our own fantasies, beliefs, and dreams, which were then becoming destroyed or mutilated in the modern world, and could find no breathing room or aptitude to taste them. Elfin Forest, as it is mentioned, holds very much sentimental value for me. This was one of the first few places that Eden and I would visit occasionally when we had met each other once again. in our adulthood and began forming rather quickly a loving companionship. We had known each other in our middle school years when we were a lot younger. However, she messaged me one day on the internet and then I responded. We began communicating to each other a lot more afterward. Soon after, we were meeting up and visiting each other at various places wherever we felt was good enough to go. Soon, we would inevitably begin hanging out more often at her place. My home was not very preferable, as tension would likely rise with Adam Regis, who wouldn't prefer many visitors at his place, especially not a woman. In any event, I filmed the video Elfin Forest April 2010, where I journeyed to that sacred spot where the two of us sat down and held each other for the first time nearly 2 years ago before the film was recorded. I made sure to document the precise area, logs and stones by the stream where we had sat down still together. This film in particular was made during the time when the communication between the two of us had truly withered, where there was hardly any drive in her to make an effort to speak to me, to write to me, or to visit me. Iden's priorities shifted majorly at this time onto other things. Never again were we as close to each other as we had once had lovingly been. This film was a rather depressing time for me. I possessed hardly any other contacts, and I was desiring her considerably, though she would not understand this. In March of 2011, our friendship officially deceased. We haven't talked to each other since. To this day, I still like her rather greatly and desire to reconvene friendship with her, though she has changed very much in her character. I would find it very difficult to talk to her without becoming offended by her way and manner of speaking to me. I never would know how to approach her again after the following months. Eventually, I nearly ended up forgetting about her most of the time. Anyway, I hardly keep secrets from anyone, as it can likely be sensed, so talking about Iden and I is just another symbolic concept in my life that I wouldn't mind sharing. She did have a soft spot for rock, as she liked a band named Muse very much. She dressed in a lot of black, and skirts too, all the time. She hardly ever wore any pants. This was something in addition that I loved about her so considerably. A lot of the symbolism that related to me during the time that I found her again in May of 2008 was death-oriented, calling my soul toward a mothering, comforting character which I found greatly in Iden. As prior to our relationship, prior to June of 2008, I had been adapted and conditioned into environments focusing and concentrated on incredibly masculine, patriarchal, and feminine forbidden roles due to Adam Regis's values for his children, in particular the jinn, the Satan, Kopecki brother, quote unquote, unmentionable, unedible, unholy, and I, who were the ones living with him at the time, while my Kopecki brother Neil was fortunately out on his own, I believe, though never lived with Adam Regis. My Jinn to Satan, Kopecki so-called sister, quote unquote, unmentionable, unedible, unholy, was still living with. Goodness. Fuck. What do we call her? Darla Jean. That's that. And stepfather, quote unquote, a much more open and tolerable setting for healthy communication to mature. Although my stepfather had always been rather difficult to deal with. Iden's nurturing character, as I see it, along with her characteristic insecurities in regard to what I would think about her and such, led rise to a rather vulnerable condition of her. She was rather experienced in degenerate behavior and lifestyles from the past. I helplessly grew jealous over time of her actions, as I desired to be more knowing and wiser than her within the relationship, as my values of an archetypal nuclear family demanded it to being so, as so many moderns of this day reject this kind of role conditioning, which all the more creates further strife and misunderstanding of the ways of nature and life adapted to it as such in essence. Soon, while in the relationship, I became cold-hearted to her and intensely disillusioned with her existence. It was also a terrible dilemma, although I hardly could change my sentiment or passionate feelings for her, for it was so difficult to do. It was beyond my ability. Eventually, slowly but surely, even after the both of us comprehended the supposed fantasy of eternal, everlasting love, that no bond shall be broken, and other false lies, she worked her dialectic toward a state where leaving each other and departing from each other became more actualized, and by August of 2009, we had officially split up after final arguments, though she had told me, and I wanted it to be made clear that we were to remain the best of friends. I desired this tremendously, as I knew and spoke to hardly anyone but her outside our relationship at the time. Even as we were breaking up, to add further delirium to my trouble, I had arranged already to move and resituation of myself to a desolate cabin up in the mountains, all alone, without anyone hardly ever living in it. I say hardly because the second floor was occupied by vacation renters every couple days or weeks. I retained the portion of the cabin that was downstairs to my own. These renters were burdensome as well. The footsteps and creaky wooden floors were highly irritating. Likewise, there would be partiers every now and then that would rent the place, screaming and shouting, running around, slamming things, breaking things, doing drugs. It was awful, I came to think of it. Iden and I, during this time, were still seeing each other rather frequently and enjoying each other's company, although arguments or soliloquies of disillusionment on my occasion were still very common. Doing this kind of soliloquy would usually result in her having to ask me or force me to leave her house, which was very upsetting for me, as I would nearly be trying to make sense and reason out of the whole situation that was unfolding. I would drive down to her place and pick her up every now and then. We would both spend some nights together by ourselves up at my cabin. I did not like this cabin at all, as it can be seen. Apart from being alone for much of the time, there were constant appearances of these very big and creepy spiders nearly every hour of the day. Millipedes crawling around the floor, frighteningly grotesque beetles. I was developing arachnophobia quickly as a result of instances like these. Likewise, there were strong evidences of spirits at night. The whole cabin was haunted, I came to believe. I would literally hear footsteps on the second floor as though someone were walking around it. I would rent a hotel room sometimes with Iden, much to the detriment of my wallet, though I found doing this necessary. The power would go out frequently while the visitors were upstairs. The whole cabin simply wasn't structured or formed well enough to support so many people. I would be sitting there in constant pitch-black darkness, not knowing what to do, without heat or ability to cook food. Anyway, one night Id and I were alone at the cabin. For the whole night we had already been bickering tremendously. I nearly crashed the car on our way up the mountain as a result of aggressive driving due to my anger that I had created for ourselves. I'm not ashamed to admit any of this, nor will I conceal my errors. We were lying down to sleep. We were both incredibly vehement and passionately against each other. She was moving the bed deliberately, in a very irrational way, also hitting her foot and such on the bed, creating much noise. I would ask her to stop. She would not. I would ask her to stop. She would not do so. I felt that my anger was accumulating at this point. I remembered in total all the terrible, disillusioning, irritating, and frustrating experiences I had had with her up to this point, despite that I still was in love with her, although trapped in my own helpless jealousy and wrath. I then snapped and turned around very quickly and beat her on the face, punching her some 12, 13, 14 times as we had later accounted. When I stopped and got up, I immediately recoiled at the greatest fear and sympathy to her for what I had done. I remember uttering, "What did I just do? I cannot believe this just happened to you," or something similar. I then turned on the lights. We both found blood splattered and sprayed all over the walls, on the bed and sheets, her face covered in it. I may have broken her nose, as the main source of blood was coming from there. She later gained many bruises and a black eye, and had to cover it with dark make-up while back in town to make it look as though it weren't there, while around her family and schoolmates and such, she had difficulty concealing this. She went into a state of panic. Some of the most severe hyperventilation had occurred to her that I had seen. I had my head on the ground, crying in utmost denial and disbelief for what I had done. We were alone together in the cabin. There was no one within miles around us. We had to work together with each other and come to terms with what had happened. I feared instantly, and very rightly so, that afterwards she would leave me for good, that I would never see or talk to her again. We later cleaned up the blood as best as we could. She was to be there at my place for the night. She and I agreed it would be uncomfortable for us yet to drive her down back to her place in town. We lied down that night. She had me sleeping on the floor, though this was very uncomfortable, and she later relented and let me sleep on the far edge of the bed. She had the bed to herself initially. Throughout the night, I could only imagine the severe nightmares and occasional flashbacks she would have, that she was noticeably having, every now and then startling herself from her thoughts of the night. In reflection, it all was one of the most hellish, nightmarish events of my life. The beating itself had occurred and was over in nearly an instant. I hardly remember how I turned around and began it. I seemed to have been possessed and helpless by some satanic impulse. Afterward, in the morning, we had awoken to only see one of the most beautiful sights of the whole countryside, covered in snow. We took videos of this and many pictures and played around in it and explored the area in our mittens and scarves. I personally think, as everything is symbolic in accordance to the nature and character of the subject's will, that the snow experience represented something very deep, merciful, and benevolent. It was so peaceful and serene, given that it did occur in consequential harmony of the absolute nightmare of the preceding nights. This whole experience occurred during the very end of November of 2009. She was nice to me and remained understanding of my condition throughout December of 2009. However, during January of 2010, things became much different. Her character changed dramatically, and she became very difficult for me to talk to or to form a benevolent dialectic of friendship. She became very negative, in the abstract philosophical sense, that every positive concept or idea that I would suggest to her would only, by her demeanor, find rejection in it and dismiss it. Then she would offer a more realistic, utilitarian alternative in regard to something else less ideal, and far from it. This I found was very frustrating to deal with. Thus, we continued further arguments or soliloquies of disillusionment or dislike. I finally moved out of that primitive cabin in February of 2010 back to Adam Reed's place. Eden and I were rather friendly and tolerable of each other at this time. We had become more distant and were not in each other's company as often. Therefore, when we would greet each other, we would be generally more optimistic and filled with a further sense of desire to know what the both of us had been up to. As this can be seen by what I have said earlier in this writing in regard to the Elfin Force video, that this video was filmed by April of 2010. It was during this precise time that I had felt very deeply and confidently within me that Eden and I had finally separated in the form of relationship, friendship, and acquaintance. As at around this time, her messages to me were quickly becoming ever so sparse, distant, indifferent, careless, to inform me of anything occurring in her life. Any new subject matter was left for other people to know now. Her priorities in our friendship were lifted and carried off elsewhere. Thus the necessity to film the Elfin Force video to document and summarize my memories of her presence in my life. Now that I felt an irreversible path in our relationship had come unfortunately into being, we talked and met up with each other over the rest of the year, only very little. I went to see her perform a show in June of 2010. Where she would accompany on the piano a middle school concert band. She had found employment in middle school during doing this at the time as such. We went to see a few movies over the course of the year. However, as we did this, as it was one of the only few methods that we found where we were capable to keep in presence with each other, without becoming too close or personal. As if this latter were the case, then the usual characteristic soliloquies of disillusionment and jealousy were to occur. It simply could not be helped, and sadly had led to the destruction of, and ultimately did destroy, the foundation of our relationship. Otherwise we would have been perfect for each other, and would have found little fault or flaw in the essence and substance of our relationship. We had many great plans to move out to a far-off land in a cabin in the woods together, where she would cook and clean in the house during the day, and I would come home in the evening after a hard day's work. We were very romantic, Victorian in spirit. She and I at times desired children, 2 of them at least. It was said earlier we rarely talked or met over the course of later 2010, and by March of 2011, after brief communication with her in regard to sharing some quotes to college newspaper in regard to my piano playing, she and I experienced our last final statements. I told her I will not hide anything or keep secrets from others. To kill yourself and rot in hell, poisonous witch. And after this moment, we cut each other off out of our lives almost completely and have not spoken to each other ever since. After experiencing all of this that I have iterated in the past and gone through, despite the invasive jealousy that truly didn't deserve it in the place and context of the relationship, and thus unfortunately came to ruin the fortune of our company, I still had loved her very deeply and found so many things about her character so very compatible with my own. I keep some of the pictures of hers saved to this day. Likewise, some of the gifts that she had given me during the relationship, some candles, some seashells we had found and picked up for each other while at the beach, a crystal sphere with little snowflakes in them that would flutter down when you would turn it upside down. Likewise, I still find myself thinking about her, and at times I see her symbolically in many of the things that I perceive throughout the day, especially her car, that was a white Prius. I see certain cars similar in nature to hers, and I found instantly remembering her and imagining her appearance in these cars as a reference from God. trying to speak to me about my past, knowing that she had so profoundly and tremendously impacted my life and such. Anyway, I do tend to get very compassionate when I speak to others about her enigma that she was in my life. I'll never forget her, even after all these even after all these unfortunate experiences with her. She was truly remarkable and entirely left in an irreparable and unforgettable mark on the substance and essence of my character. I bid her spirit to rest in happiness, as I know she will find this without me. She would not be happy to know me. Thus I do not interfere with her. I accept the truth that we are for the better apart and detached from each other. November 19, 2011. I've not listened to Verity very much in my life as of yet, though I acknowledge that I'm generally young in my age, thus probably did not experience his music simply because it has not made its appearance in my life yet, that everything in the world cannot be fathomed within such short years that my life has so far underwent. Of course, I understand very confidently the universal, unmatched superiority of Richard Wagner's music. Good Lord, his music sends me to tears. At an earlier time, when his operas were rather new to me, in particular Parsifal, when I purchased Hans Knappertsbusch's 1962 recording with Hans Hürter as Gerndenmans, the deepest and most profound voice I've ever come across in the realm of operatic music. It was in isolation listening to it completely. After a while, music seemingly and symbolically began to tear a wound in my heart. With every listen, my tears and compassion for his music were growing. Until at one point, while listening to the final chorus of Parsifal, the part where the Grail Knights close in on Amfortas, I deemed this section de facto the darkest moment in music. My wound had virtually driven me to convulsions. I was shaking and trembling due to the monstrous, tremendous effect of the music. Basically, his music is that effective, especially to those subjects disposed to master morality, as Wagner's music, later operas especially, speak incredulously in regard to the reality of what master morality is like, and standing in relation to the utilitarian modern world, where the master's failure to succeed in his dreams and ambitions is evidently perceived, where the only triumph of his will is contained in the hero's memory, the reflection is based back upon his experience, or at least it is contained in his imagination, where otherwise such visions of his cannot be realized or actualized in the concrete realm. I've never been too much of a fan of Italian opera in general. I have this marked peculiar aversion to every lingual sound that is Latin or tongues that belong to the Latin romantic family of languages. Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and such. These languages, I feel, are some of the shallowest on earth, full of little-hearted optimism, which is hardly philosophically ideal, very irritating quickness and outbursts of superfluous particles, a wet, moist, disgusting method of the tongue. Overall, I'm instantly repulsed and desire to find better, healthier breathing room. Because of this reality, it can be seen easily the difficulty that I have listening to operas embedded with these languages. Fortunately, I have been blessed with the acquisition of knowledge of English, and with the reality of German being a faithful partner to this language. Wagner's operas are indeed ever more satisfying and coalescing in their spirit and harmonious ideas. Beethoven I prefer to an extent. I do think that some of his piano music, especially a few particular sonatas, are rather impossible to perform without a shallow approach, which this is never the case, and impossible to do credibly with Wagner's operas, which in my case consisted with the various piano transcriptions that I would find at college. Chopin's melodies are likable to me. Something about him, however, steers me away from categorizing him as among the greatest, simply because I think he is almost devoid of philosophical understanding, which again, this is something very heavily found in Wagner's works. Once more, there he is found positive to elevate to divine status. I listened variously to Prokofiev's works. I see that there are many pieces that he composed that were rather crazy and atonal. If it is not known, there was a time in my life during 2010, most especially where I would improvise in a kind of fast, crazy atonality very eminently. Yes, during an earlier epoch in my life, my certain style of playing could be described as very Lisztian. I later came to recognize myself sadly as a showman. Thus my whole method of piano playing transformed and redeveloped, where I would hardly play the piano anymore as a means to show off my level of talent, that of which this was something I had otherwise been doing previously throughout the vast majority of my life. I don't know if I were to sit down and play some Liszt today, that I would be able to find it playable with much ease. I simply need to practice more these days. I'm currently living without a piano. The nearest ones available are miles away down the mountain at various colleges. I think by December, when I begin earning more money, that I will begin making excursions down to town, beginning practicing more and taking up recording once again. I love doing this regardless. Yes, an earlier time in my life I had a liking for Vladimir Ashkenazy and Horowitz. Only later did I recognize the greatest pianists and conductors that were ever the more relative in their spirit to my own. Knappensbusch, as it is known, Furtwängler, Karl Milch, Karajan, and such, as far as it goes for conductors. My favorite singers are such as Hans Herter, hands down, as well as Josef Grindel, a very coarse and fierce baritone, a good example of Furore tonics through music. Wolfgang Wittgenstein, Jess Thomas, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, Gotthelf Pistor, René Cola to an extent. There are many others too, of course. One day I'm certain I will find Don Giovanni received and acquired in my hands, even if the libretto be written in Italian. I see in colors very much, as well as visions. Hardly a moment follows where I am not thinking of something very abstract or picturesque. It is simply the nature of my character. I am helpless to prevent it from occurring, which I wouldn't desire it from doing so either. The practice elevates and lifts my intellect to soaring levels. I see myself as an artist concentrating on truth and idealistic perfection. It is true I have read an entire biography on Wagner several months ago. The Tristan Chord, it is called, written by a British man, Brian Maggie, is very exciting and stimulating to read. There were chapters that would go in depth into the solace and salvation that Wagner would find while reading Schopenhauer. He even dreamed of this extraordinary philosopher at times, becoming obsessed with him during the 1860s, I believe, until the end of his life. I love the character of Cosima too, by the way, so very virtuous and noble, yet understanding of the eminent genius that was Wagner, therefore tolerable of his necessity to devote himself to and create incredibly great works of art, which he did so very effectively. Ludwig too was also another character during the time of Wagner that gives much inspiration to me. The rider on horseback that would recite poetry with his friends, a king bent on love for his cousin Elizabeth, a patron of the arts, specifically of Wagner, an exile in his construction of these huge fantastic castles that his architects would ever build for him. There exists the movie Ludwig that is from the 1970s, I believe. It is very interesting and informative of his life and times. Anyway, Wagner did hold true to Christian values, or at least he did so very indirectly on the surface. I'm sure he would have embraced heathen values if only he analyzed his character and his nature more completely. Nietzsche disapproved of Wagner's Christianity and anti-Semitism over time. However, it was noted that after Nietzsche had attended a performance of Parsifal that even he had made mention of the notion that has Wagner ever written anything better. It is hard to believe that this was so said by him, as Nietzsche was later always noted for disapproving the aesthetics and overall harmonies and structure of Wagner's music, for it represented generally pain and suffering in the heart of man. If listened to enough, one becomes weaker, closer to suicide, something totally opposed by Nietzsche. I can see how the ancient Greeks would have approached this opera instantly with a judgment of disapproval and negative sentiment, as they did not or would not desire to feel so mushy or sentimental, as this emotional element was something they were striven to categorize as alien and foreign to the mode and method of practical existence. Christianity, indeed, as is evident by a keen glimpse into history, weakens the spirit and organism of a body politic. Only now in the 21st century are the effects of the seeds implanted in the soil by Christianity coming to bear the most offensive and rotten fruit within the realm and dimensions of Western thought. There is a very likely possibility that the ancient Christians encouraged this religion as a weakening tool for the spirit and vigor of the ancient Romans. Various emperors initially persecuted these heretical people. However, over time, the religion gradually became dominant and swept through the cities like a plague. Even the emperors following the 3rd century were powerless and ineffective to stop it, thus submitting and baptizing themselves to his creed upon their deathbeds and such. It is such a delusional religion, tricky and cunning, perfect for the time to grasp and take hold of a public society when the spirit of the times has begun fading into cultural exhaustion. Especially during the era of the Kaisers, 2,000 years elapsed while, within the hold of the pseudo-religion, it is inevitable that internal darkness will present and spread itself over the foundations and establishment of the West. November 19, 2011. I've not heard of this book, The Jesus Mysteries, although I will need to find it and read it sometime, as much of what has been stated from it so far seems rather credulous and preferable. All what is said from the sample of it seems true, too. The Christian is so very close-minded closed-minded of universal learning, knowledge outside of his general creed. It is so very sickening as time progresses. The Christians try to convert innocent people to the dreadful clutches of religion, so that they will merely have more followers and become closer to dominating the world and ruling the earth with their liberal, pusillanimous, feminine doctrine. What a nightmare they present themselves to be. A great call for intelligence I demand. A call to power, virtue, and steadfastness before the appearance of these witch-like scoundrels. We are fortunately blessed with the right amount of intellect to drive away the demonic forces that these people represent. However, there are many of them. There are frequent, or at least occasional, cases of their existence that will manifest themselves in our lives. Thus, that this will undoubtedly occur. We simply need to act rightly with genuine spirit in order to ward them away effectively. It is difficult to be sure, as their religion represents the greatest, most complete lie ever known to the history of man. However, there are many open flaws and realities that are possible to point out at them. With the succession of time, more and more realities should become exposed by the spirit and progressive evolution of the West, to the point that the religion will merely revert to a shadow of the past. For so much ideality of their doctrine will have been recognized as sham, malignant, favors, and wasteful. Realistically, in fact, I'm probably certain that this will not happen, that I'm sure that simply another pseudo-creed will spring up, more secular and designed for the nature of the most tremendous of idiots. It will then indoctrinate itself into the lives of men, into the knowledge of the nature and unchangeable character of men, where simple-minded stupidity finds sensational inspiration over genuine virtue and nobility. I'm sure the custom and manner of this subjection is infinite and eternal. November 19, 2011. There are many aspects and ideas about Judaism that disgust me as well. However, Christianity represents the main religion that truly infuriates me. That this creed is evidently sourced from the Hebrews, these people that thus damage their reputation of their character. I then am consequently forced to hold them in a lower level of opinion and evaluation because of this. The 10 principles of the Frankfurt School are truly terrifying, and that such men of this world would make such reference and motivation to create and formulate these elements and decrepit innovations in a natural or civilized state, in particular that of the West, which belongs to you and I. Therefore, we are alienated and desire very vehemently to secure the existence and foundation of our people. Otherwise, the world shall inevitably destroy or overshadow the spirit and emanation of these true archetypal manifestations of human subjectivity within the state of the North and the Western Mediterranean. The 60s and its relative hipsters of the time generally disgust me very greatly. The generation conceived themselves right after many millions of innocent people had died and perished during the Second Great War. Therefore, it is only natural for the objectification of the will to manifest millions of foolish people in the West, sometime relatively soon after this great catastrophe. Thus, they were to proceed and create a pseudo-anarchical state of truly Christian values. Hatred of the law and the state's order, virtually everything solid, hard, rigid, and phallic. These people truly are the ruin of the earth. It is pitiful to think that so many men fall victims to these creeds, where their very phallus represents a threat to its own extinction, as though they are welcoming of their very suicide, which they indeed do when their cunning masks and many-sided concealments of their true values are lifted and exposed for all that they are, of little to no worth. There needs to be a universal re-evaluation of Western society's comprehension of morals, a renewed predilection toward master morality, a swift-acting emperor with an iron fist. Otherwise, the backward, progressive course of liberalism will extend itself over time, tear down the very walls of even the most central defenses, surrender to defeat in the eternal darkness of chaos, anarchy, and once secret egalitarian wishes. November 20, 2011. I remember feeling terribly empty and anxious when I would return home to my last cabin from visits with Eden, prior to 2009, early 2010. Going home to an empty house with the remaining longing and memory of a good friend or lover is ever so painful. On the brighter side, as it can be seen in music of mine from this era, May of 2011, I was searching tirelessly for new harmonies and sounds that were unique, however not totally beautiful or serene, as I intended to include tones that were influenced rather greatly by atonality, with its kind of special character, though returns are always made in my music where the atonality may seem to upset a balance between that very method, and with tonal, common practice period harmonies as well. Wagner, of course, his influence is evident nearly everywhere, especially in the piece known as Triumph of Beauty, and over time, in even later recordings I tend to steer away even from this composer's influence. As blasphemous as this may sound, however, I feel that I had exhausted every great motive and modulation owing from the influence and spell of this great man's music. Therefore, almost necessarily, I turn on to more original, groundbreaking harmonies, without the influence or recommendation of any previous composers. Lord, I desire to return to the piano once more, begin practicing recording, I feel that my musical ideas are maturing greatly over this period of time. Thus, I crave to chisel my thoughts into marble and share with them with the rest of the world in all the music's strange innovations. English, as being a part of the Germanic family of languages, listening to the speech of it, detached from subjectivity, language is so very heartfelt, honest and sincere, slow and thoughtful, passionate and prone to much philosophical understanding, as the language of German is rightly disposed to being so as well. I'm proud to possess a speech belonging to such a superior association of families. I cringe in the horror of some recordings of Wagner's operas, particularly of Placido Domingo singing Lohengrin, or his singing Walter in Den Meistersinger. The enunciation of his words is so very alienating. The notion that the operas last for hours on end with his voice in action sends me to tears of pain and agony, though not literally. I have not experienced the voice of Peter Schreier, though I would look around on the internet for some recordings of his and see what he is like. I had no idea that 15 recordings of The Ring, such a temporally vast and extensive work of art, even existed. The most I have ever come across and was able to count through research and finding recordings of it in the library was 5 or 6. During 1 month, a little while ago, I rented successively a production of the 4 operas that comprise The Ring and listened through it in its entirety. That was a salty recording. I did enjoy many of the singers in them. I don't recall exactly who sang who, though Jess Thomas, Hans Herter, George London, an excellent Amfortas, I think, and Gustav Neidlinger were all shown apart from throughout the work. This was a recording from the 50s or 60s, I believe. I wonder if some of the recordings of this total artwork even exist in print anymore. I'm sure that many of them are hard to find and are likely very expensive. I see that Hans Hotter in his earlier years was certainly much greater in spirit, composure, essence and such than when he continued to sing late into his career. There's Lord Melchior as one of the Heldentenners. I believe Max Lorenz was one as well. I hear things from others that such singers are timelessly rare and hardly exist anymore, that their voice is effortless in power and pitch and such. I love it when Good Health Pistor sings the final segment of Parsifal in the 1920s Moog recording, as that oration creates such a dreamy, ethereal, slow, timeless, inevitably restorative atmosphere. I went crazy initially over performing Wagner's transcription works on the piano in as slow and heavy as possible way, as I found that doing this, especially Parsifal's long breadth of motives and modulations, that this was musically ideal, that it was almost totally likely that Wagner himself had preferred this, seeing that Karl Milch and various conductors from the generation just after Wagner's time conducted Parsifal, various other operas of his in that slow, dreamy-like way. The conductors following the Bayreuth revival, with Hans Knappertsbusch especially, were evidently influenced by this magical technique. The earliest recorded conductors likely had learned from the master himself, with his intentions of doing things this way. November 20, 2011. It is true that my friend Tor and I, Odin, would arrange in the past these very well-planned excursions to the desolate wilderness. There was one instance in December 2008 that we had set out to the fields of a mountain. It was snowing in these days. We carried these 80-pound rocks on our backs, traversing the countryside for about a mile and a half, where we would eventually make it to our camping destination. My pack unfortunately had not been tied adequately onto my back. Therefore, after I received these huge, immense bruises on the back of my thighs as a result of the rock, with its hard contents pressing within it, banging on the back of my legs with every step, we established a hanging tarp with 2 trees to form a shelter. We set up fireplaces underneath and rolled out our mats with our sleeping bags. Unfortunately, it turned out during the night that my sleeping bag that I had purchased prior to the event of this trip was not sufficient for the freezing degree of the cold. Therefore, I remained awake and shivering throughout the night. Only later in the following morning did I begin developing a cold. Because of my general exhaustion that I had experienced, I persuaded my friend and I to head back to his van and head for home. I needed to leave behind many of the contents of the pack. I was so incredibly tired and weak from the brutal hike the prior day to the campsite and such. I think to this day that many of the contents of the pack that are left behind still remain in their same position, as the spot we had picked to set up at camp and was so very desolate and devoid of human habitation. On our way back, there was this herd of cattle that we crossed through that were very quiet and tense. We felt terrified knowing this, that the very danger of this situation would consist if they were to begin charging at us, which may have been likely to happen, and it would have probably left us up for dead. It was beginning to snow on the way back very heavily. By this time, my friend was well ahead of me, but he was soon residing in his van. I, on the, I, on the other hand, was shivering from the cold, shaking and trembling from my weakness and exhaustion, needing to set my pack down with almost every walking step. It began snowing very heavily at this point. I was likely very quickly developing hypothermia. By the time I had arrived at his van, with him settled rather cozily and toasty in the warmth of the heat of his car, and I shaking and nearly ready to drop dead as a result of the cold, the physical exertion, the exhaustion, the sickness, and such. I remember sharing a mutual smile and laugh with him at each other, recognizing that the rather ridiculous situation of everything that we were fallen within at the time was over. Earlier in December of 2006, we made plans and arranged for a trip to experience rather much like this one, where we headed off to the mountains in the cold weather of the snow to kept it out for a few days and such. This didn't turn out as such, however. It is remarkable now that I think back on all this, that we never truly experienced a successful camping trip lasting longer than one day, as there's reasons and realities obstructed our ambitions from completing our plans. The December of 2006 camping trip eventually didn't turn out over time. It was officially terminated, whereas I began attending college once again at this time. Tor was more heavily preoccupied with his employment in the Navy SEALs. After this time, when he had been sent away, I became rather very misanthropic, dark and isolated from the common world, as I possessed very few contacts at the time, wherein my brother Neil was pretty much the only person in my family that I could retain a sufficient contact with. As for the others outside of my blood relation, there were very few. I recognized the difficulty involved necessarily in finding good companions, given my shy and introverted disposition, as well as that for most of this time I was not employed in any work with other people. Likewise, I was not attending college, where there would have been much greater potential to meet with people at such a place. However, with my condition, this wasn't the case. As well, there was these two very shallow, gossipy girls that I knew that nearly destroyed the totality of my reputation among the people at the college. After this, it seems that my whole personality and character developed and changed in its essence to practice much more benevolent acts and sincerity, rather than appearing ever so wicked and hateful. I think to this day that I remained still rather affected and transformed by the unlikely experiences these people and the times that I had known them. Indeed, my love was passionate with Eden. During August and September 2008, our relationship was at its prime. We had hardly experienced any arguments or hostile negativity between our persons. Sometimes I did not know what to think of her, whether I should continue loving her and to stay with her, or rather to distance myself from her and separate, as the latter was likely the best for the both of us. However, I think I chose to stay with her for a merely selfish reason, that rather than wanting her as a companion, I rather needed her as a companion, as otherwise without her I would return to a very lonely world, without hardly any persons to contact with if ever I needed the help, warmth, or love in any degree or means. There was not a single other material element in my life during this time. It is true that during the entire time of my relationship with her, I did not have anybody else to relate to. I was essentially alone, regardless if she remained present in my life and occupied sociably with various other people, as over time we hardly had any capability to go through the day without arguing or feeling disillusioned or hateful. It seems that I was alone with her or without her. It seems that I was alone with her or without her. However, when I was with her, I merely imagined her as someone drawn from my memory, as an older, more distant form of her person, someone good that I remembered in the initial phases of our relationship. This was not the reality, however, thus I felt trapped again. I know certainly that was the best for both of us to inevitably split up and go our separate ways, as I have learned over time that people do essentially change for better or for worse. The latter in this case proved rather to be likely. I do understand, however, that it is very probable that her love for me was rather unconditional during that time when I had beat her. Therefore, this is evident by her in that she did not immediately run off and never see me again. I think she understood throughout the course of the relationship and in the 1 year after it how deeply I needed her as someone to breathe with and share my interests of the world with. I know and had known immediately after that terrible act that I should not have hit her at all, never, ever. I became instantly repentant, however. This is obviously known to her during that fateful, though dreadful visit she had experienced while up at that cabin with me, as I would cry sincerely with much vehemence with every notion and reference she and I would make during those initial days regard to the beating. It was only inevitable that she would become more and more distant from me over time, as she had done so, and much of the karma afterward I sense had taken place through an exemplification of my of the particular Kopeki Jin male Jin to Satan, of cursing, shouting, hammering, and pounding, hatefulness, abuse, and such that then occurred during this time. I think that all this was necessary for me to experience as a direct effect and consequence of performing that terrible action that I had done so onto her, but once and finally gone companion Eren. Anyway, it is so unusual that it, however commendable and respectable as someone to understand my side of this picture objectively and fairly. I think most persons would scare away or condemn me unconditionally to a lake of hellfire. Eden is gone from my life. I'm certain she would never receive any of my words with kindness or open toleration any more, as it has unfortunately come to be, though I'm happy for her if she's indeed enjoying life, as she could only be doing so without me, because of the absence of me and my character that inevitably would develop despise for her, as she was rather trashy in her past, intoxicants, promiscuity, and such. November 20, 2011. I found a particular video on the internet that was very grave. However, there was total truth to the concepts and ideas illustrated in the video. God and nature, if ever they manifest human subjectivity, would represent the Satan that the children in the video came up with. Christians fail repeatedly to acknowledge the Creator as superhuman, transcendent from frailty, unconditional love or mercy. He is all as he contracts and extends all. He terminates his motives through pure reason and necessity. There he acts accordingly through the law of cause and effect, birth, death, regeneration. He would be found practicing similarly his free will in reality in what is found precisely within that very honest and realistic video. The video represents a 1980s children's television show featuring Mark Twain and some children meeting up with a superhuman figure in another dark dimension. It was later banned from television for appearing too disturbing for its younger viewers. It is all quite a sudden attempt to mature the nature of a young audience. This film baffles adult Christians regardless and leaves them writhing in the pain of exposed reality. Their wishes that the world weren't so necessarily empty, cold, and irrational. The great lie persists, however, due to the inherent nature of weaker men striving to find comfort in compromised happiness or in a state of withdrawn, abnegated peace. November 20, 2011. Most people nearly always end up disappointing me, in that they never truly interest me from the start, that their morality and values are forever tarnished by an egalitarian world, wholly nihilistic or indifferent to philosophical virality, power, apocalyptic wisdom. I have never had many friends throughout most of the various epochs of my life, my middle school years being the only exception. Otherwise, most of the time that I would visit the others and be with them, a sort of compromise was needed to create, in the knowledge that I was never going to be able to pursue my dreams or to actualize my visions with them, as they simply did not have the desire within them to do so, or otherwise they would focus their attention on base, mundane, utilitarian activities. So much of the Western world has now fallen into the slump of shrugging off meaningful effort and creativity, of doing anything that may stand out as an extraordinary exception, something marvelous. They merely rejoice in the notion of sleeping their time away to experience boring, uninspired ideas, coupled with an eternal sense of despise for the national law, for legality and patriarchal orders, that they wish to descend it into an anarchical state, wherein all their base, awful desires may become realized, regardless of the massive consequential destruction that the state of the West would come to from outside their narrow periphery. November 21, 2011. When I listen to Good Health, Pistor's final recitation in Parsifal in the Milk recording, I become so very enlightened and divinely inspired, especially to bring my newfound interpretation of much of Parsifal's execution to the piano transcriptions that I would perform at college. I swear it is as though this technique possessed a magical formula, that it is guarded from the emasculates, and thus must become educated and instructed to those persons just entering initiation. Most subjects, the very great majority of persons, haven't a clue that this kind of performance has ever been conceived of or thought about in the realm of great conductors and performers. I'm glad so much to have, fortunately, experienced and come across the titanic greatness of those conductors of the past that conduct their orchestras to perform Parsifal and various other gigantic works of art in such a dreamy, slow, lovely-like way. I hadn't any idea that George London was Russian, let alone Jewish. I thought at the time that he was merely British, given the rather English kind of name. His performance on Alfortas I find incredible, and I cannot diminish my respect and honour for him. I enjoyed Lord Melchior very much. What a reward it would be to have experienced a performance of one of Wagner's works with the appearance of a Helden tenor. I wonder whether there will be any of them more to come in the near future. It seems that the world does not produce very great people or intellects like it once had used to, unfortunately. Goldhelf Pastor was an incredibly natural, gifted, and rare singer. He certainly directed and commanded the orchestra by the lead of his authoritative voice. November 21, 2011. There are definitely various dark forces at work here in the West, particularly at its worst in North America. Unfortunately, the conditions are rather the same in Western Europe, that these two areas are the final breeding grounds and breathing room for white Teutonics and Mediterraneans. The policies of immigration are fully submerged into taboo decadence. There is no regulation enforced to put an end to the spiritual, cultural, and physical degradation and annihilation that is rapidly ensuing in these areas, the territories that house and shelter the last remaining stock of the Europeans. Within 5 or so centuries, as no regulation or action is evidently being taken, with the Europeans' asphyxiating breathing room becoming compressed into its final ultimate level, it is inevitable that this race, yes, I say race, I'm designating a particular human as a universal substance, will evaporate and disappear over time, as is observed to have done so already in many of the lands and territories of Southwest America and such. This process is ceaselessly, unreservedly continuing, therefore as what has already happened there in the Southwest over time, with the impossibility of racial declarations and commandments being given conception due to the fatal law of political correctness. The very same erasure, evaporation, and disappearance of the national stock of Western Europe and North America in general will logically and calculatedly have taken place, much to the horror of the last few remaining Europeans in this world, hated by the rest due to developed resentment and wrath sourcing for the radical and dramatic progress and evolution that the cold-induced Europeans had awoken their consciousness into and had since performed. This hatred is unfair and unchecked, of course, for the Western's intention was to civilize and conquer the entirety of the barbarity and chaos of the natural world. Although the particular details of this conquest appear undesirable, unlikely to many, it otherwise appears as something favorable, where it is reflected upon a detached, distant, dispassionate perspective, taking in the idea of the timeless spirit and rationality of humanity in general, the prime representation of the human race, found best bestowed inside the cultural creativity and nuclear family of the West. All this is controversial to the imbecile liberal now. However, it is his very abundance and grip on the state of the West that continues to preserve the very poison and malignant cancerous disease that ceaselessly unfolds in its destructive nature and character onto this once very civilized state. I recall reading an article a few years back stating it is a good thing to see more of the black men in political administrations here in Sweden. I was astonished in disbelief, taking into account the preposterous, hypocritical, paradoxical, and ironic situation of this understanding in regard to South Africa and such, the general folk's desired ends of apartheid, a consequence of racial awareness found as evident in the black man. However, with the white man, such a thing is utterly misunderstood and falls from recognition, as the white man is subconsciously, without his stupid nature knowing it, releasing his will and giving out the remainder of his riches and wealth to the poor and poverty-stricken, as he soon prepares himself to rest eternally, deceased and forgotten, on his very death-bed. I don't think this is ever necessary for him to do, as with each life spirit conceived, as a Westerner or not, there exists desires to experience the privilege of life, spontaneity, and sprightliness. What horror it would be, or rather is, in coming into life where he, as an infant or child, must instantaneously be reminded that he is born and to die, while elsewhere every other race is presently experiencing prosperity and abundance. Likewise, likely the goods were rewarded to them, for the most part, having come from the towering treasury of universal knowledge once developed, advanced, acquired, and stored in the threshold for the Western man's spirit anyway. All this is ridiculous. There must be given the opportunity and chance for a subject, regardless of his national identity, to grow, mature, prosper, and live. To grow, mature, prosper, and live. Otherwise, what use would there be to desire life, as therefore death and suicide will remind us every day of its impending truth. However, while exposed and revealed to nature's essence, it is that death and suicide are the last and final resources of action to take into subject's phenomenal manifestation into the realm of reality and ontological existence. November 21, 2011. 11/24/2011. Decline of the West. An a priori conception of vast spiritual wilderness. Timeless ideas extended. Eternal manifestations of God's utility. Beasts of prey, herbs of nutrition. Timbers and lakes. License for utility in the domain of spiritual life. evolution of the trilobite, birth and death of the Tyrannosaurus, an eternal continuous manifestation of a limited number of spiritual ideas, apocalypse and regeneration, subjectivity, a representative consciousness within every waking formation and organism, fish, insect, beast, bird, an eventual regeneration of man, succession of time, population growth, a lawless condition develops in unfolding chaos and insanity, immense brutality in primitive ways, a recognized stark reality, a helpless suffering and bare essentials, ominously a foremost introduction, once in time an appearance of a mysterious unknown subject, sent into the swarming horde of wild subjective human phenomena, an acquisition of attention from many various organisms, attraction to genius, repulsion to insanity, an encapsulation of awe and mystical transformation of the once unseen subjects among the herd of human numbers, comprehension of visibility, temptation to understand, in order to depart further into the darkness and receive a relative transfiguration of Holy Communion, helplessly an inevitable demonstration of certainty as presupposed and predetermined from a long distance, a memory of rigorous trials, wiser resolutions, and constructive experiences. Within the demon's unholy circle of empiricism, a curiosity of immediate monstrosity, soon to sow the seeds of animosity, roaming forces of dialectic, almost perpetually subordinating the reflective subjects into weakened state of hypnotic condition, dominate the floor of the concrete abstract kingdom, closer toward the domain of universal totality, ravishing the prospective pride of experiences of such glorifying victory, consequence of past eternal errors and reconstructive mistakes, striving to overcome insurmountable difficulties, a struggle that forms conditions the character into Napoleonic thirst for domination and conquest, a helpless happiness to grind the heads of my purest enemy, perpetuation the grip, everlasting heathen satisfaction, wickedness to others, religious belief and subjective opinions arise, although relative truth is represented in the eye of the beholder alone. Neither opposition will find entreaty, continuous struggle to escape from the master, eventual denial of reality, happy all the more, an eventual manifestation of disbelief of reality in the empire's totality, the master lessened somewhat, a presentation of melancholy, although with an acquisition of renewed knowledge, over time successive objectification of labor toward the master's megalomaniac state, reflections spent working upon monetary ethic and commercial responsibility, denial of the slave's aptitude to comprehending time, space, and causality, the eventual revival of pure understanding, doubt and conclusive sympathy result from subjective criticism, clash of the numbers, the throne upholds, tried and tested amid the reactionary ordeal of the absolute insatiable monarch's revolutionary dominion, a foremost resituation, reevaluation, redefinition of life's contract, its intelligible character, the plausible multiple forms of utilitarian terminology, inevitable decapitation of the emperor in discarded purple robes, triumphant reestablishment of human sovereignty, prosperity of the horde in a lost and forgotten absolution, the reign of toxicity, re-establishment of law and order, however within denial and bondage of the strong character's freedom and transcendental ideality, suffering, pain, dread endure for the archetypal patriarchal elements, endless disease and paradoxical web, consideration of Christian renewal of heathen's birthrights, evaporation and revelation of entire spiritual character, decline of the West. November 24, 2011.